Leif's blood stained the white snow as his mother, Helga, knelt before the circle of warriors, begging for her son's life. Her desperate cries echoed through the frozen valley, but the council of elders remained unmoved. Ragnar Olafsson watched the scene with a heart torn between the clan's law and the memory of a promise made to a fallen friend. Thank you for joining us today. This channel is just beginning its journey, and every subscriber helps keep this project alive. If you find value in the stories we share, please consider subscribing. It truly makes a difference. We'd also love to know where you're watching from, so feel free to leave a comment with your city. Your support means the world as we build this community together. The morning light filtered weakly through a dense veil of gray clouds, the kind that seemed to press down on the earth itself, heavy with the promise of more snow. Outside, the wind howled like a restless spirit, rattling the wooden shutters of the small cabin where Ragnar Olafsson stirred from a restless sleep. The sound was familiar and unwelcome, a reminder that the unforgiving winter still held its icy grip over the land. The cold was sharp enough to bite through the thickest furs, and even within the sturdy walls of his home, the chill lingered like a ghost. Ragnar lay for a moment beneath the heavy wolfskin that covered him, eyes tracing the rough wooden beams of the ceiling. The faint scent of smoke from the dying embers in the hearth mingled with the sharp tang of cold air leaking through the cracks. His breath came out in small clouds, a visible reminder of the frost that clung to everything. He could feel the ache in his muscles from days of constant vigilance and the slow gnawing of hunger beneath his ribs. The winter was cruel this year, merciless in its silence and relentless in its passage. At 37, Ragnar's body bore the marks of a life forged in hardship and battle. His broad frame was lean yet powerful, as if shaped by the very winds and stones of his homeland. Long, dark brown hair streaked with threads of silver fell to his shoulders, tangled and unkempt from the restless night. His thick beard, flecked with gray, framed a face etched by time and scars. The most prominent mark was a jagged line running from his right temple down to his jaw, a souvenir from a fight long past. His steely blue-gray eyes, calm and piercing, flicked open and closed, as if weighing the world outside, ever watchful. Slowly, he rose from the rough wooden bed, his joints stiff from the cold and the strain of endless days on the frozen plateau. His hands, calloused and strong, reached for his cloak, heavy wolf fur, worn but still warm enough to push back the frostbite. By the time he stepped outside, the sun had barely risen, casting a muted glow over the snow-blanketed village of Raven Shield. The settlement lay nestled between towering pines heavy with snow and the frozen fjord beyond. Low stone houses with thick thatched roofs were clustered together against the biting wind, chimneys releasing thin trails of smoke that vanished quickly into the gray sky. The ground was a tapestry of white, broken only by the deep tracks left by sledges and the footprints of villagers moving about their daily tasks. Ragnar's breath billowed in the cold morning air as he moved purposefully toward the village center. The wind tugged at his cloak, whispering ancient songs of gods and warriors, stories of honor and sacrifice carried through generations. The scent of pine and frozen earth filled his nostrils, grounding him in a world where survival was a daily battle. The village was quiet, but for the occasional creak of wooden carts and the distant calls of those who had already begun their morning chores. Children, bundled in layers of wool and leather, clung close to their mothers, their faces pale from the cold. There was a heaviness in the air, an unspoken tension that had settled over Raven Shield like the snow itself. Ragnar's steps led him first to the communal storage huts. The wood was dark and damp from the constant freeze-thaw cycles, and the heavy doors creaked open with protest. Inside, barrels of dried fish, salted meat, and root vegetables were carefully stacked, rations meant to see the villagers through the brutal months. Yet, even with these stores, the numbers told a stark story. Each barrel was lighter than the last, the supplies shrinking with relentless certainty. He ran his gloved hand over the rough surface of a barrel, feeling the cold seep through the wood. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his broad shoulders. As the clan's counselor and a warrior respected for his wisdom and strength, he carried not only his own burdens, but those of every soul in Raven Shield. The Jarl's absence weighed on the village. A void felt keenly in these harsh times. Torsten, the Jarl, had left weeks before on an expedition southward, seeking alliances and trade that might replenish their dwindling stores. Ragnar had been left to oversee the village in his stead, a duty he bore with solemn resolve. The snowbound silence of the fjord closed off all hope of external aid. No merchant ships would break the ice for months yet. As he stepped back into the biting wind, the edges of his vision blurred with snowflakes drifting on the breeze, each one cold and sharp as a blade. His thoughts drifted briefly to the faces he had seen the day before, faces drawn tight with hunger and fear. The children growing thinner, their eyes dull with fatigue, the mothers turning away to hide tears, the elders whispering in grim counsel behind closed doors. Among these faces, one stood out with a painful clarity: Helga Freyasdottir, widow of Gunnar Mausdefaro, a man whose loss still echoed through the village like a haunting song. She moved quietly among the other villagers, her shoulders stooped beneath the weight of grief and hardship. Yet in her eyes burned a fierce determination, a spark that had not been extinguished by loss or suffering. Ragnar thought back to Gunnar, his friend and brother-in-arms, a man of great strength and laughter, whose booming voice had once filled the longhouse with tales of battle and kinship. Gunnar had died 3 winters past, claimed by a raid that had left the village scarred but unbroken. Ragnar had sworn then to protect his family, a promise forged in blood and grief. He found himself walking toward Helga's small cabin, the ground crunching beneath his boots. The village, though quiet in the early morning, seemed to hold its breath, as if knowing the weight of what was to come. The cold pressed in on every side, a silent witness to the struggles within. Helga's door was ajar when he arrived, the flickering light of a dying fire revealing the thin silhouette of the woman within. Her hands were busy weaving strands of wool into a tattered cloth, her movements slow and deliberate. She looked up as he entered, her green eyes meeting his with a mixture of weariness and hope. "Ragnar," she said softly, her voice cracked from weeks of illness and sleepless nights. "The winter is crueler than any I have known." He nodded, stepping closer, the warmth of the fire a meager shield against the cold that seeped through the walls. "It tests us all, Helga, but we endure." Her gaze dropped to the floor, her fingers tightening around the cloth. "My strength fades with each passing day," she confessed in a whisper. "The food is gone, and I am too weak to hunt or gather." Ragnar listened, the ache in his chest growing heavier. He had seen the toll this winter had taken on the village, how desperation clawed at the edges of their lives, turning even the strongest to shadows of themselves. From the corner of his eye, he noticed a figure curled on a worn fur mat, Leaf. The boy's pale skin seemed almost translucent in the dim light, his breathing shallow but steady. Despite his frailty, there was a stubborn set to his jaw and a quiet resilience that spoke of his father's spirit. Ragnar crouched beside the boy, catching the faintest flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Leaf," he said quietly, "you must be strong. For your mother, for the clan." The boy nodded faintly, but the shadows under his eyes told a story of sleepless nights and hunger's relentless grip. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying with it the distant howl of wolves, reminders of the dangers lurking beyond the village borders. The mountains to the north were a forbidding presence, their peaks lost in swirling snow and mist. Few dared venture there, and fewer returned. Ragnar rose, wrapping his cloak tighter around his shoulders. His mind was already the silence between the trees was profound, broken only by the soft crunch of snow underfoot. The cold seemed to seep into the bones of the earth, and with it, a sense of finality settled over Raven Shield. This winter was not merely a season. It was a test of survival, of honor, and of the fragile ties that bound the clan together. Ragnar's gaze lifted upward, past the heavy clouds to the faint outline of the sun, struggling to break through the gloom. Somewhere beyond the mountains, beyond the endless ice and snow, lay a world still waiting to be claimed. But for now, his place was here, in the heart of the storm, standing between justice and mercy, between law and loyalty. The days ahead would demand more than courage. They would require sacrifice. And Ragnar Olafsson was ready to pay the price. The chill wind bit deeper as the village slowly came alive beneath the gray sky. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the distant clatter of hammer against metal echoed from the smithy, a reminder that life fought on, even in the bleakest of seasons. Men and women moved with purpose, gathering firewood, tending to the sick, mending clothes worn thin by cold and toil. Among them, Ragnar observed the steadfast determination etched into every face. The clan was resilient, even as hunger claimed more and more of their strength. He passed the smithy, where the blacksmith hammered steadily on a glowing piece of iron. The rhythmic sound was steady and sure, like the heartbeat of the village. Ragnar paused a moment, watching the sparks fly, then stepped into the cold once more. Beyond the village, the frozen fjord stretched out, a vast expanse of ice and snow, impassive and eternal. It blocked the sea routes, cutting off what little trade and fishing the clan depended on. The ships rested idle at the docks, their wooden hulls creaking as they shifted with the slow swell beneath the ice. Ragnar's eyes followed the frozen horizon, imagining the journey that lay beyond. The northern mountains rose like ancient sentinels, dark and forbidding in the mist. Few had ventured there and returned. Stories of wolves larger than horses, of tribes fiercely protective of their lands, haunted the old tales. Yet, it was to those mountains that hope now looked. If food could be found there, it might mean survival, not just for Leif and Helga, but for all of Raven Shield. His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp cry of a child, then the hurried footsteps of a hunter returning from the woods. The man's face was drawn tight with worry, breath coming in ragged gasps. "Traps broken," the hunter said urgently, catching his breath. "Someone's been stealing. Last night." The news was swift and harsh, a blow that rippled through the village like a storm. In times like these, theft was not merely a crime. It was a threat to the clan's survival. Ragnar's jaw tightened. His mind raced, wondering who would dare take what little the clan had left. The law was clear, but so was the fear that desperation could drive even the noblest to dark choices. As the day wore on, the villagers gathered in small clusters, voices low and tense. Whispers of suspicion and fear spread like wildfire. The bond of trust, once strong as forged steel, felt fragile, worn thin by hunger and hardship. That evening, as twilight deepened into night, the longhouse filled with the low murmur of the elders convening. Ragnar took his place among them, the weight of his role settling like a stone in his gut. Helga arrived quietly, her presence a silent plea. Her eyes, haunted yet fierce, met Ragnar's across the room, a reminder of the promise he carried and the choice that lay ahead. Outside, the snow fell steadily, covering the village in a cold, white silence. The echo of the coming storm was all that answered the desperate cries beneath the flickering torchlight. And so the stage was set, the law against mercy, the clan against the individual, honor against the heart. In the shadow of the biting winter, Ragnar Olafsson prepared to walk the narrow path between justice and compassion, a journey that would test not only his strength but the very soul of Raven Shield. The cold had seeped into every corner of the village, weaving its icy tendrils through rough-hewn timber and biting through layers of wool and fur. Even the fire in Ragnar's own hearth struggled to push back against the relentless chill. Yet, despite the harshness of the season, the village of Ravenshield was far from lifeless. It pulsed with a fragile heartbeat, one caught between endurance and despair. That morning, as the pale light crept over the horizon, Ragnar found himself walking a familiar, uneasy path toward the heart of the village. His steps crunched softly in the packed snow, the sound swallowed quickly by the whispering wind. The village was stirring, but an unnatural stillness lingered beneath the surface. Faces that once bore the firmness of resolve now flickered with shadows of doubt and exhaustion. Helga's cabin stood quiet, its thatched roof weighed down by layers of snow. The smoke that usually curled from the crooked chimney was faint, almost imperceptible. Ragnar hesitated for a moment before pushing open the weather-beaten door. The air inside was heavy with the scent of damp wool and faint herbs, remnants of the curative potions that Sigrid, the healer, had left behind days before. Helga sat on the edge of a wooden bench, her shoulders trembling with silent sobs. Her green eyes, dulled by sleepless nights and illness, lifted briefly to meet Ragnar's steady gaze. The weight of her grief pressed down like the snow outside, cold and unyielding. Leif lay sprawled on a simple mattress near the fire, his breath shallow and uneven. The boy's thin frame was a fragile outline beneath the faded woolen blanket. Dark circles framed his striking blue eyes, eyes that, despite their youth, held a mournful wisdom born of suffering. Ragnar crouched beside him, careful not to startle the fragile figure. "Leif," he murmured, voice low but firm. "You must hold on. We cannot lose you now." The boy's lips parted slightly, a faint whisper slipping through. "For Mother," he breathed. She needs me." Helga's hand trembled as she reached out to touch her son's forehead, brushing back the limp, golden strands of hair. "He has carried more than any child should," she said, voice breaking. "For weeks, he has been my strength when I had none." Ragnar's gaze drifted to the small amulet hanging around Leif's neck, a carved piece of wood, weathered by time. Gunnar's gift, a symbol of protection, perhaps, but fragile against the cold and cruelty of this winter. The door creaked open, and Sigrid stepped inside, her eyes sharp beneath the heavy hood. She carried a bundle of herbs, their pungent aroma fierce against the dankness of the cabin. Her fingers, stained with the colors of roots and leaves, moved with practiced ease as she set to work, murmuring prayers to the gods. "His fever rises," she said without looking up, voice steady but grave. "Without food, without warmth, he fades like the dying light." Her gaze shifted to Ragnar, searching. What will be done? Ragnar's jaw tightened. The law was clear. Theft could not be tolerated, especially now. But the boy, Leif, was not a mere criminal. He was a child caught in the merciless grip of survival. The promise to Gunnar echoed in his mind, an unbreakable thread woven in blood and brotherhood. Outside, the village was stirring with tense whispers. The council was assembling again, voices low but edged with urgency. The elders debated the fate of the boy whose crime threatened the fragile balance of their survival. Ragnar rose, the weight of his decision pressing down like the iron cold around him. He turned to Helga, seeing the desperate hope flickering in her eyes. "I will speak for him," he said quietly. "But the path I choose may lead me beyond the edge of this world." Helga grasped his hand, her own as rough and worn as the earth. "You carry not just my son's fate," she whispered. "You carry the hopes of us all." As Ragnar stepped back into the gray light of dawn, the wind seemed to still for a moment, as if the very gods held their breath. The snow continued to fall, muffling the world in its white silence. Ahead lay a path filled with peril and uncertainty. But for the first time in many weeks, there was a fragile glimmer of something else, hope. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. Ragnar's calloused hands, so accustomed to the weight of sword and shield, now performed a gentler task. He lifted the bowl to Leif's lips. The boy's mouth parted hesitantly, tongue flicking out to taste the warm broth. A soft groan escaped him as he swallowed, the effort clear in the tightening of his slender neck. Helga watched with a flicker of hope, her breath catching when the boy managed to drink more than a few sips. She reached out to smooth back the damp hair from his brow, her fingers trembling but gentle. The small scar on her chin, a faint mark left from years of hard labor, caught the firelight, a testament to the life she had endured. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the fire and the soft slurping of the broth. The cabin's walls seemed to close in, pressing the outside world away, suspending time in this fragile cocoon of warmth and care. Ragnar finally spoke, his voice low and rough from disuse. He needs more than food. The cold bites deeper than the wolves outside. His eyes met Helga's, searching for a sign of understanding. She nodded, reaching for a worn blanket to wrap tighter around Leif's thin frame. I have herbs, she whispered. Sigrid left some tinctures. They might ease the fever. Good, Ragnar replied, standing and moving toward a small wooden shelf where a few earthenware jars sat under a layer of dust. He selected one, the rough clay cool beneath his fingers, and returned to Leif's side. The boy's eyes flickered open again, momentarily brighter. He tried to sit up, but a faint groan stopped him. Ragnar's strong hands caught the slight movement, steadying him with a gentleness that seemed at odds with the warrior's hardened exterior. Leif's gaze lingered on the amulet around his neck, a weathered carving shaped like a wolf's head, its edges worn smooth by years of handling. The boy's fingers twitched reflexively, tracing the symbol, a silent prayer whispered in a language older than the village itself. Helga caught the motion and gave a small, sad smile. I believe it keeps the worst away, she said softly. A gift from his father. The moment stretched, a fragile thread of connection weaving between them. Ragnar saw in Leif's eyes a stubborn flame, not just of survival, but of something deeper, a fierce love and an unwillingness to surrender to the cold that threatened to consume him. He poured a small measure of the tincture onto a rag and pressed it gently to the boy's lips. Leif's throat worked, swallowing the bitter medicine with grim determination. The lines of pain in his young face softened, if only for a heartbeat. Helga exhaled slowly, relief mingling with exhaustion. He's been like this for days, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. Refusing to rest, afraid of what will happen if he sleeps too long. Ragnar's gaze darkened with understanding. Fear is a strong prisoner, he murmured. But we cannot fight it alone. The cabin fell into silence again. The fire's rhythm filled the space, a steady thrum against the cold void outside. Ragnar settled onto a wooden stool nearby, watching Leif's chest rise and fall with cautious steadiness. Outside, the wind's howl softened, then grew once more, a wild song that spoke of storms yet to come. Inside, a fragile peace settled over the three souls bound by fate, a warrior, a widow, and her son, caught in the merciless grasp of winter. Minutes passed, marked only by the crackle of burning wood and the faint shuffles of movement. Helga leaned forward, brushing a stray curl from Leif's sweat-damp forehead. Her fingers lingered, hesitating before tracing the faint, fresh scar on his hand, a mark from a failed hunt days before, when desperation had driven him too close to danger. Leif's eyes flicked toward the hand, then to his mother's face, the painful memory etched plainly in his gaze. He swallowed hard, lips pressed tight against the rising tide of pain and shame. Ragnar observed quietly, sensing the boy's struggle, a young soul caught between pride and survival, too proud to beg, too weak to stand alone. The night deepened, the fire's glow casting long shadows that danced like restless spirits. Helga's voice broke the silence, quiet but resolute. "You saved him," she said to Ragnar, eyes shining with gratitude. "I never thought anyone would." Ragnar shook his head slowly, the weight of his promise pressing heavily against his heart. "It was not the boy I saved tonight," he replied, voice low, "but the memory of a friend and the hope for a future." Leif stirred, his eyes fluttering open once more. He reached out a trembling hand toward Ragnar, fingers brushing against the warrior's forearm, a small gesture, but one loaded with unspoken trust. Ragnar met the touch, a rare softness breaking through his stern facade. For a moment, the hard edges of the world receded, leaving only the fragile bond of a clan held together by more than laws or blood. Outside, the snow began anew, blanketing the earth in silence. Within the cabin, a flicker of warmth endured, a fragile ember against the endless winter. As the night wore on, Ragnar prepared a small meal, dried fish softened in broth, roots boiled until tender. He coaxed Leif to eat, watching each bite with a warrior's patience tempered by newfound tenderness. The boy's hands, though shaky, grasped the food with a hunger that spoke not only of the body but of the will to live. Helga sat close by, her gaze never leaving her son. She hummed a low, ancient tune, a lullaby Gunnar had once sung, carried now in her voice like a fragile shield against despair. At one point, Leif's eyes met Ragnar's, and a quiet question hung in the air. Why? Why would a man risk everything for a boy not his own? Ragnar's reply was in the steady presence beside him, the unspoken vows held in the scars of friendship and the sacred honor of promises made long ago. The answer needed no words. The fire sputtered low as the night deepened. Ragnar wrapped a blanket tighter around Leif's shoulders, his hands lingering a moment on the boy's cold skin, feeling the faint pulse of life beneath. Helga leaned her head against Ragnar's shoulder, a silent gesture of thanks and shared burden. Outside, the wind howled on, but inside the cabin, the warmth of care and connection held firm. For the first time in weeks, the fragile threads of hope began to weave a new tapestry, one stitched not with steel or blood, but with quiet acts of mercy and the unyielding strength of the human heart. As dawn crept toward the horizon, the cabin stood as a beacon against the endless white, a sanctuary where trust was born amidst the echo of snow. The silence that had settled over Raven Shield since Ragnar's departure was brittle, like the thin ice cracking beneath the weight of an unseen world. Yet, even in the depths of winter's harsh grip, news traveled on the wind. Whispers carried from one village to another, carried by travelers, hunters, and wary traders who dared to cross the frozen wilderness. The tale of Ragnar Olafsson's defiant act spread quietly at first, a shadow flickering in the flickering flames of hearth fires far beyond the fjord, but it was not long before it reached ears that stirred uneasily. Within the tight-knit confines of Raven Shield, life took on a fragile rhythm of waiting and watching. Helga and Leif remained huddled close, their bond forged anew by Ragnar's sacrifice. Yet even as hope flickered in their eyes, the village's peace grew increasingly tenuous. The elders, once silent in their stern judgment, now spoke in hushed tones of consequences beyond their borders. The law that had bound them so tightly to their harsh customs was no longer only an internal matter. It threatened to unravel the delicate balance between clans and tribes that governed the northern lands. One bitter morning, as the pale sun struggled to cut through the gray veil, a rider arrived at Raven Shield's edge. His horse's breath steamed in the icy air, hooves clattering against the frozen ground. The man was a scout for a neighboring clan, the Frostwolf tribe, a group known for their ruthless efficiency and unyielding loyalty to their own laws. He carried news that chilled the village more than the winter's bite. "Word has spread," the scout announced, voice low but clear, eyes scanning the gathered wary faces. Ragnar Olafsson has broken the law, taken the punishment meant for another. The Frostwolves view this as a challenge, an insult. Murmurs rippled through as he trudged through the desolate wilds beyond the mountains. The weight of his promise pressed heavier with each step. Wolves, larger and more numerous than any tale had claimed, prowled the shadows. The bitter cold seeped deeper into his bones. Yet, the knowledge that his actions at home had stirred unrest filled him with a grim determination. Ragnar's thoughts often returned to Helga and Leif, their faces etched in his memory like the runes carved into his sword. Protecting them meant more than survival. It meant safeguarding a fragile hope amid the relentless winter. But even as he hunted the uncertain lands beyond the reach of Raven's shield, others ventured closer. Frostwolf scouts, silent as shadows, prowled the outskirts, seeking evidence, seeking leverage. Rumors of a warrior walking into the mouth of the northern wilderness, bearing the burden of a stolen fate, spread like wildfire. One night, as the wind howled through the skeletal branches of frost-covered trees, a small band of strangers arrived at the village gates. Their faces were obscured by heavy furs, eyes sharp and cold. They carried no weapons openly, but their presence spoke of vigilance and intent. Helga met them at the gate, her heart pounding. The stranger's leader stepped forward, an imposing figure, his voice low and edged with steel. "We come from the Frostwolves," he declared. "They demand Ragnar's return. Your village's mercy has stirred the ice beneath us all." Helga's voice was steady but laced with fear. "Ragnar fights for us all. You would condemn a man who sacrifices everything for this clan." The man's gaze hardened. "The law is not bent for one man's mercy. Justice is the shield that guards every tribe. Without it, chaos reigns." The village held its breath. The fragile order that had kept the northern clans from tearing each other apart trembled on the edge. Helga's eyes met those of the strangers, the unspoken question hanging heavy in the frost-bitten air. How to protect those they loved when the demands of the many threatened to crush the few. Inside the longhouse, Ragnar's absence was felt keenly. Sigrid's hands trembled as she prepared her healing herbs, aware that the cost of mercy might soon be paid in blood. Ulfgar paced with mounting frustration, torn between the law he had sworn to uphold and the whispers of compassion that now threatened to fracture the village's resolve. The council's unity was unraveling, the old ways clashing with the desperate needs of survival. And beyond the snow-covered peaks, the frost wolves prepared, their own warriors gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. Ragnar, in the cold wilderness, sensed the shifting tides. Each step forward was a defiance of fate, each breath a battle against the creeping frost. Yet, the knowledge that his village faced threats far more lethal than hunger steeled his resolve. He thought of Leif's small hand gripping the amulet his father had given him, the fragile symbol of protection and hope. The boy's courage in the face of exile became a beacon in the darkness. But the world was closing in. The price of mercy was becoming clear. One evening, a messenger arrived, breathless and urgent, bearing a sealed, rune-marked parchment. It was from the Frost Wolf chieftain himself, a summons to answer for Ragnar's transgression or face the wrath of a clan betrayed. Within the walls of Raven's shield, Helga held the letter like a burning coal. The words etched in ink were cold and unyielding. Justice would be demanded, and Ragnar's choice would bring reckoning not only upon himself, but upon them all. The village braced for the storm. In the shadows beyond, enemies gathered, their eyes gleaming beneath fur-lined hoods, their swords ready to carve a path through snow and silence. And in the heart of the frozen north, a warrior's journey became a battle not just for survival, but for the soul of a clan struggling to hold on to honor when the world itself seemed poised to tear it apart. The air was brittle beneath the sky darkening with low, heavy clouds that pressed down like an omen upon the village of Raven Shield. The snow, once soft and forgiving, was now crusted and icy, a harsh surface that betrayed every footstep with a sharp, brittle crack. Inside the longhouse, shadows flickered uneasily as the villagers gathered, their faces etched with worry and resolve. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks now boiled fiercely, threatening to spill over into chaos. Ragnar Olafsson stood near the center of the hall, his broad frame imposing even in the subdued firelight. Yet beneath the weight of his wolfskin cloak and the gleam of his silver-hilted sword lay a weariness that had settled deep into his bones. The long journey into the northern wilderness, the biting cold, and the looming threat from the frost wolf tribe had carved new lines into his stern features. His scarred face, usually so unreadable, now betrayed a flicker of anxiety that only those closest might glimpse. Across the room, Helga Freyasdottir stood with arms crossed tightly over her chest, her green eyes sharp and unyielding despite the fear that gripped her heart. Beside her, Leif Gunnarsson, though still pale and fragile from his ordeal, held himself with a quiet dignity, the firelight catching the faint shimmer of tears that clung stubbornly to the corners of his blue eyes. The council of elders had convened once more, their voices low and serious as they debated the peril now threatening their home. Ulfgar Thorvaldsson, the elder who had once been so unyielding in his condemnation of Leif's theft, now spoke with a voice strained by age and worry. "We have invited the wrath of the frost wolves upon us," he said grimly, his blind eye seeming to pierce the shadows beyond. "Ragnar's mercy may have saved the boy, but it has placed us all in their crosshairs. They do not forgive such defiance." Sigrid Gudrunsdottir, the village healer and voice of tempered compassion, stepped forward, her gaze steady despite the palpable fear in the room. "War is no answer," she implored softly. "We cannot fight a war when we are starving, when our strength is sapped by this endless winter. We must find another way, one that honors our bonds without bringing ruin." But the murmurs of dissent were growing louder. Whispers of fear, of impending violence, stirred uneasily among the villagers. The well-worn traditions of law and honor clashed bitterly with the desperate need for mercy and survival. Before the council could fracture further, the heavy doors of the longhouse slammed open with a thunderous bang. A cold wind swept inside, carrying with it the sharp scent of frost and leather. All eyes turned as a tall figure stepped forward, his face partially hidden beneath a fur hood. His gaze, cold and piercing, scanned the room with the ruthless calculation of a hunter. The man's voice was low, edged with steel. "I am Eirik Frostborn, messenger of the Frost Wolf chieftain." He pulled back his hood, revealing a face marked by battle scars and icy blue eyes that seemed to hold the frozen wilderness itself. "We have come for Ragnar Olafsson. The laws of the North have been broken. Mercy shown where none is due." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Helga's hands clenched into fists at her sides, while Leif's gaze flickered anxiously to Ragnar. Ragnar stepped forward, voice steady and unwavering despite the storm in his chest. "I stand here as the one who chose to bear the penalty meant for another. The law was broken by my own hand." His eyes met Eirik's without flinching. "What is it that you seek?" Eirik's lips curled into a grim smile. "Justice. The Frostwolf chieftain demands that you answer for your actions. You are to be judged, not by your own clan, but by ours. And the penalty will be severe." The elders exchanged uneasy glances. The longhouse, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison closing around them. Ulfgar's voice broke the tension, though his words trembled with age and uncertainty. "Can we not resolve this without bloodshed? Ragnar has acted out of loyalty and honor." Eirik's gaze sharpened. "Honor is found in the law, not in broken promises. Your mercy threatens the balance of power. The Frostwolves will not allow such defiance to go unchallenged." Helga's voice rose, trembling but fierce. "Ragnar saved my son's life. He risked everything for us. Shall we repay that with death and destruction?" Eirik's expression hardened. The law does not bend for the weak or the grieving. It is absolute. Ragnar's mind raced. The Frost Wolves' demand was clear. A trial. The next morning, under a sky veiled in steel-gray clouds, Ragnar set out alongside Eirik and a small band of Frost Wolf warriors. The village watched silently as the warrior who had risked all for mercy walked willingly into the jaws of judgment. The journey was harsh and silent, the wind slicing through furs and the snow crunching beneath their boots. Each step carried Ragnar farther from the fragile warmth of home and deeper into the cold heart of a world where honor and law clashed with survival and sacrifice. As the towering peaks of the Frost Wolf domain loomed ahead, Ragnar's thoughts turned to Helga and Leif, to the promise that had bound him and the fragile hope that still flickered like a dying ember. The trial would not be just a reckoning of his deeds, but a test of the very meaning of honor in a land ruled by ice and blood. And in the frozen silence between those mountains, the fate of a clan and the soul of a warrior would be decided. The longhouse was quiet as the icy winds moaned outside, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had convulsed the village in recent weeks. Within its timber walls, the flickering flames of a low fire cast shadows that danced like restless spirits, reflecting the unease still lingering in the hearts of Ravenshield's people. Yet tonight, there was a subtle shift, a fragile thread of hope weaving its way back through the cold fabric of fear. Ragnar Olafsson sat near the hearth, his mighty frame hunched slightly from exhaustion, but his eyes still sharp and vigilant. The journey to the Frost Wolf domain and the trial that had followed were etched deeply into his body and soul. His cloak, once rich and full, now hung in tatters, and the silver hilt of his sword bore the scars of many battles fought beyond the safety of his homeland. But despite the bruises, frostbite, and loss, including the numbness in his left hand that refused to fully return, he had come back. Alive, triumphant in a way that no blade could measure. Helga stood across the room, her green eyes searching his face, filled with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and cautious hope. Beside her, Leif was no longer the fragile boy who had once trembled under the crushing weight of guilt and hunger. Though still thin and pale from the harsh winter, the boy's gaze was steadier now, lit with a quiet fire that spoke of survival, of being seen and understood. The village had gathered in the longhouse, the elders among them, their faces softened by the passage of time and the undeniable weight of what had transpired. Ulfgar Thorvaldsson, the elder once so rigid in his adherence to law without mercy, had softened over the weeks. His blind eye gleamed with a new kind of wisdom, born from witnessing the sacrifice Ragnar had made and the consequences it had wrought. Sigrid Gudrun's moved quietly among the people, her hands steady as she dispensed healing herbs to those weakened by the relentless winter. Her eyes held a gentle kindness, but also a fierce determination, a reminder that survival required more than just strength of arm. It needed compassion, understanding, and a willingness to embrace change. Ragnar cleared his throat, his voice rough but steady as he rose to address the gathered clan. The room fell into silence. Every face turned toward him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. "The law of the clan is sacred," he began, "and it has held us together through storms, wars, and hunger. But the law without mercy is like the blade without the hand that wields it. It serves no purpose but destruction." His blue-gray eyes scanned the faces before him, seeking their understanding. "I took upon myself the burden meant for Leif, not to defy the clan, but because I remembered a promise to my fallen brother Gunnar, to protect his family, no matter the cost." A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Helga's lips trembled, and Leif shifted uncomfortably, but did not look away. Ragnar continued, voice steady despite the weight of his confession. "The Frost Wolves judged me, hard and without mercy. They demanded justice for what they called a broken law. But I told them what we all know, that honor is not only in the law, but in the promise we make with our hearts, the bonds forged in blood and loyalty that no sword can sever. Ulfgar stepped forward then, his voice gravelly but firm. Ragnar's journey was a test not just of his strength, but of our own understanding. The law is our foundation, yes, but it is also our shield and our fire. It must protect the weak as much as it binds the strong. The elders nodded, many faces softening as the truth settled in. The village had endured much: hunger, fear, the threat of war. And yet here they were, still standing, still bound by a fragile hope. Helga found her voice, rising to speak with a strength born from weeks of suffering and endurance. My son stole not out of greed, but out of love. When the cold nearly took me, it was his hands that tried to feed me. For that, I am forever grateful to Ragnar, and to this clan, who has shown me that even in the darkest times, we are not alone. Leif stepped forward then, his voice barely above a whisper, but filled with quiet conviction. I was afraid, he confessed, afraid of what I had done and of what would come. But I have learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it. Ragnar showed me that. The gathering was silent for a long moment, the weight of the boy's words hanging in the cold air. Then, slowly, the clan began to respond. Nods, murmurs of agreement, and the soft gathering of hands reaching out to one another, bridging the gaps carved by fear and hardship. Ragnar looked down at Leif, a rare softness breaking through his hardened exterior. You have the spirit of your father, he said quietly, and the strength to carry it forward. This clan will stand with you. Outside, the wind had begun to wane, the relentless howl easing into a whisper. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the heavy sky, settling gently upon the ground like a silent benediction. The harsh winter was not yet over, but inside the longhouse, the warmth of reconciliation and renewed bonds burned bright. In the days that followed, the village became a place where the past's harsh judgments softened into lessons of mercy and resilience. The elders, once rigid in their ways, began to listen more closely to the voices of those who suffered in silence. The law remained, but it was tempered by a growing understanding that survival was as much about the heart as it was about steel. Ragnar resumed his duties, not just as a warrior or counselor, but as a living testament to the power of promises kept, even when the price was steep. His presence was both a comfort and a reminder that the strength of a clan was measured not only in the battles it won, but in the compassion it showed. Helga and Leif found new footing among their people, their story becoming a quiet beacon for others who struggled in the long shadows of loss and hardship. Leif, once burdened by shame, grew steadily stronger under the watchful eyes of the clan. His youthful determination transformed into a mature resilience, a testament to the unyielding spirit that defined the people of Raven Shield. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the pine-covered hills, casting long golden shafts through the village, Ragnar stood at the edge of the forest. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine needles and the faint promise of spring beneath the endless white. His hand brushed against the worn amulet that hung around his neck, a symbol of Tyr, god of justice, and a reminder of the balance he had sought to restore. Behind him, the village of Raven Shield lay quiet but alive, its people bound together by wounds healed and promises honored. The echo of snow that had once carried only despair now held the faint notes of hope. Ragnar's gaze lifted to the distant mountains, forbidding and eternal, and he knew the path ahead would always be fraught with challenges. Yet, for the first time in many long months, the weight on his heart had shifted. It was lighter now, buoyed by the knowledge that honor was not merely found in law or sword, but in the unbreakable ties forged between those who choose to stand for one another. As the cold wind whispered through the trees, Ragnar turned back toward the village, ready to face whatever storms would come. For in the heart of Raven Shield, amidst the snow and silence, the true strength of a Viking clan had revealed itself, not in punishment, but in the courage to forgive, protect. Around him, the village breathed anew. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, carrying the scent of burning pine and fresh bread, a rarity after months of rationed meals and bitter hunger. Children's laughter, tentative yet genuine, floated on the warm breeze, chasing away the silence that had once settled like a shroud. Men and women moved with renewed purpose, their steps lighter, their shoulders less burdened. Helga Frey's daughter moved through the crowd with a quiet dignity that belied the hardships she had faced. Her dress, though simple, fit her with a newfound grace, and the worn amber pendant gleamed against her chest like a talisman of survival. Her green eyes, once clouded with despair, now held the steady light of hope. She paused near the communal hearth, where a small group had gathered to share news of the season's first planting. Beside her stood Leif Gunnarsson, no longer the frightened boy bound by shame, but a young man shaped by fire and frost. His shoulders had broadened, and though his frame was still lean, there was a strength in the way he carried himself, a quiet determination visible in the steady gaze of his blue eyes. The scar on his hand, once a mark of injury and desperation, now told a story of endurance. The villagers welcomed him with nods and murmurs, their acceptance a silent blessing. His past was no longer a shadow to hide from, but a chapter of growth that bound him more tightly to the clan's future. In the circle of Raven Shield, he was no longer an exile, but a son, a hunter, a bearer of his father's legacy. Ragnar's heart swelled with a complicated pride as he watched them. The family he had fought to protect, the clan that had survived because of sacrifice and mercy. The echoes of snow had faded into memory, replaced by the soft hum of life rekindled. Inside the longhouse, the elders convened once more, but the tone was different now. Ulfgar Thorvaldsson, his white beard trimmed and his blind eye gleaming with a gentler wisdom, spoke with a voice that carried the weight of experience and newfound understanding. The winter tested us all, he said, but it also taught us what we must never forget. The law is our foundation, but it must be tempered with mercy, with the courage to see beyond the letter to the spirit. Sigrid Gudrun's daughter nodded in agreement, her hands folded calmly before her. The strength of our clan is not in unyielding justice alone, she said, but in compassion, in the ties we weave between us through hardship and healing. A quiet murmur of assent passed through the gathered crowd. The village was changing, not abandoning the old ways, but allowing them to grow with the people who lived them. The stories told by the fire would no longer be only of battle and blood, but of kindness, sacrifice, and the enduring power of promises kept. Outside, the snow melted slowly, revealing patches of earth where wildflowers would soon bloom. The frozen fjord, still formidable, began to yield to the thaw, its icy grip loosening as if granting the village a reprieve. Ragnar turned his gaze toward the distant mountains to the north, the same jagged peaks that had loomed ominously at the beginning of his journey. They now seemed less like a forbidding wall and more like guardians watching over a land reborn. The memory of his treacherous trek through biting cold and shadowed forests lingered like a ghost, but it was tempered by the knowledge that his sacrifice had forged new paths, not just for himself, but for those he loved. Leif approached quietly, the worn amulet carved by his father tucked safely into his hand. He extended it to Ragnar with a solemn respect. For the battles still to come, the boy said softly, his voice steady despite the weight of unspoken fears. Ragnar accepted the talisman, the wood warm against his scarred palm. And for the promises we carry, he replied, voice low but firm. Honor is not found in the sword alone, but in the bonds that no winter can break. Helga stepped forward, placing a hand on Ragnar's arm. a gesture of thanks and solidarity that spoke of healing deeper than wounds of flesh. "You gave us more than life," she said. "You gave us hope." A silence settled among the three, a quiet moment in which the bitter past and uncertain future seemed to meld into something precious and new. As the village gathered beneath a sky streaked with the soft hues of dawn, a new cycle began. The old fires burned steadily, their warmth a beacon against the lingering chill. Stories would be told, not just of battles fought and won, but of mercy given and promises honored. Ragnar looked across the gathering, eyes resting on faces weathered by hardship but alight with resilience. The clan had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, bound by more than law or lineage. They were tied by the shared trials of survival and the unspoken vow that no one would face the winter alone. The wind stirred again, gentle now, carrying the scent of thawing earth and distant seas. It spoke of journeys yet to be taken, of new stories waiting to be born beneath the unyielding sky. And in that moment, beneath the watchful gaze of ancient gods and towering mountains, the true legacy of Raven Shield was clear, a clan forged not by the cold bite of law alone, but by the enduring heat of the human heart. The echo of snow had faded, but its lesson remained eternal. The fire in the longhouse had dwindled to glowing embers, casting a soft, flickering light that barely reached the far corners of the room. Outside, the night was thick and silent, the snow resting undisturbed like a vast, white shroud over the village of Raven Shield. Inside, the air was heavy with a mixture of exhaustion and quiet contemplation. The trials of the past months had left their scars, but something fragile and new had also begun to take root, a sense of understanding that stretched beyond the simple edicts of law. Ragnar sat alone near the hearth, his broad frame hunched forward, hands resting on knees that creaked with age and weariness. The wolfskin cloak draped around his shoulders was worn thin, its once proud fur matted and faded. The scar on his face caught the faint glow, a stark reminder of battles fought both without and within. His eyes, those piercing blue-gray windows, reflected the firelight with a somber depth that spoke of memories and hard-won lessons. He thought of the path that had brought him here, the bitter cold of the northern mountains, the perilous trek that had tested every ounce of his strength and will. He remembered the frozen nights when the wind had howled like the voices of the dead, and the weight of the promise he carried had felt heavier than the thickest iron. Yet, it was that promise, forged in the blood and honor of a fallen brother, that had given him purpose when all hope seemed lost. The faces of Helga and Leif came to mind, the widow who had carried grief like a shield, and the boy who had stolen not from greed, but from necessity. Their resilience, their quiet strength in the face of despair, had become the heartbeat of the village's survival. Through their story, the clan had learned that honor was not a rigid chain, but a living, breathing thread woven through acts of mercy and sacrifice. Outside, the wind whispered softly through the towering pines, carrying with it the scent of thawing earth and the faint promise of spring. The village lay still, wrapped in the hush of a night that seemed to hold its breath, as if reluctant to let go of the winter's harsh lessons. Yet, beneath this stillness, a new warmth began to stir, a warmth born not from fire alone, but from the unbreakable bonds that tied the people of Raven Shield to one another. Ragnar's thoughts drifted to the elders, to Ulfgar's softened gaze and Sigrid's steady hands. He recognized now that strength was not merely the swing of a sword or the rigidity of law, but the courage to embrace change, to temper justice with compassion. The clan was not just a collective of warriors and survivors. It was a family bound by promises, forgiveness, and hope. The amulet carved by Gunnar, worn now by Leif, rested heavy in his mind. A symbol of protection, yes, but also a reminder that the future was theirs to shape. The boy's journey from fear to courage was a testament to the enduring spirit that defined their people. In that fragile spark, Ragnar saw the true legacy of his sacrifice. As the embers faded and the longhouse grew colder, Ragnar rose slowly, the weight of his years pressing upon him. He stepped outside into the night air. The night embraced him as he walked, the echo of snow beneath his feet a reminder that even the coldest silence could carry the softest promise. And in the heart of Raven Shield, beneath the unyielding sky, the story of sacrifice and loyalty would live on, a beacon for those who would come after, guiding them through their own winters of darkness. In the end, the lesson remained clear. Mercy is not weakness, and a promise kept can warm even the iciest of nights. For those who walk the path of the Viking, it is this, the courage to choose compassion over cruelty, that stands as the greatest honor of all. If this story stirred something within you, a truth about the strength found in sacrifice and the power of promises, then join us as we continue to explore the lives and legends that shape this harsh, beautiful world. Subscribe and walk with us through the echoes of snow and the fires of the north. For in the cold and silence, the human heart still holds its unyielding flame.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.